Okay, so here we are for our final video. I gave it a little bit of thought before we started, and what I realized we needed that we didn't have yet was an actual mask that will cleanly cover these bolts and this area, these sort of, I don't know, globy things at the end, where we're not going to want to change that really shiny metal. So I actually went into Photoshop and quickly made a new mask. So I'm going to go ahead and have to link that in here. So I'm going to go in here, right click, link bitmap. I'm going to go to our Photoshop file and we're going to get our bolts mask, which I just made. And you know, if we take a look at this mask, it's pretty straightforward. I just went in because, you know, all I did was trace over my bolts within Photoshop because I could see where they were exactly from the other map. So it was a relatively simple thing to do on the fly. And again, this is one of the nice things about being able to link it to your Photoshop file, is that you can, you can use it as a work in progress file and just take out the things that you actually need from it. So we're going to bring this in here. And then the other thing I thought about, all the techniques of actually layering on top, you know, a bit of a rough surface here on our metal is going, you know, we're really repeating things. So I thought, why not add something new while we're at it? So first thing we're going to do, since we're going to use this as a mask, we're going to switch to a grayscale. And then the other thing that I had also made, actually I should have imported them all at the same time, was I created a couple of, oops, I forgot to save it the last time. I don't see it. Let me just make sure I've got my Photoshop file saved properly so we can import it properly. Yep, I just need to import it. Okay, so, I mean link it rather. I keep saying import, I should say link. Okay, so there, yeah, pitted metal I hadn't done yet. Okay, so let's bring that one in as well, because we already had the scratched metal in from the last time, although we hadn't really touched it. So now we have scratched metal and pitted. It's always going to put them on the bottom, so it's not necessarily keeping them in any kind of alphabetical order. It's in order of import. So again, we're going to use these as masks. Well, we're going to use them to make normals, but it's the same idea. They still have to be grayscale. So here are our three new masks. Now, we're going to split them up by the same zones that we had here. We're going to have the main metal zone, and we're going to have this band zone. What I thought would be nice was to show you how to be able to give your end user a choice between which metal texture they'd like to use. And in order to do that, we need to go back to our library and get a multi-switch. Now, multi-switch is a very, very handy little tool. Actually, this is going to end up having to be color, and we're going to have to switch it because I'm looking here, and even though I'm going to end up wanting these in grayscale when I'm done with them, I'm looking here and I see that the multi-switch is only going to take a color input. Actually, I think it's probably going to be more efficient if I do a right-click, add node, where are we, gradient map. I'm going to Control-C, Control-V, make two of them because we're going to need two of them. Because even though I'm passing it through this extra node, it's still more efficient because this is 2K. If I turn this into a 2K color file, it's going to get pretty big. So I'm still better off doing this. So I'm going to dock these by pressing D. And now I have these two things plugged into a multi. Why are you giving me a dotted line? Well, I guess it will become apparent. Okay, let's take a look at our multi-switch. This is a node that allows us to switch between two. Okay, it was calculating. Now it's good. This is a node that allows us to switch between two textures. So I have an input number and an input selection. Now, input number determines how many inputs I want to switch between. So you could go completely crazy here. I don't know. Okay, 20 seems to be the limit. That's a lot of switches. The default is 2. We're going to keep it at 2. And then input selection is, this is number 1, and this is number 2. So it numbers from 1 to, in fact, it actually, if we get rid of this doc, it'll tell you. So input 1, input 2. Where are we here? Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Okay. And then input selection, so I can switch between 1 and 2. It's pretty handy. As it stands right now, it's going to let me go above that number, which gives me nothing. But I'm going to take care of that later on when I do my input parameters, because in our input parameters, we can actually block out, in other words, we can prevent it from going over 2. Right. So now we're going to want to switch this back out to a gray, because we're going to be using this as a mask. So add node, grayscale conversion. Okay, so we now have the capacity to create a normal Sobel like we had done in, I believe, the first video. And we'll be able to expose these later. Well, we'll be able to expose this later on. And so it's going to allow us to switch between two different normal textures. So let's get our normal Sobel. Now we can plug this in here. And again, we can expose this one also to determine the intensity of that normal. Let's leave it. 1 is way more than we need, because this is actually just going to be a super subtle thing. So this is going to be a fraction of 1. And again, we may decide to limit this for the end user later on when we do the exposed parameters. Right now, we're not going to get too complicated with this, because we already, honestly, to make this a more efficient material, we should probably have thunk of this bit before we did this bit. But because, this is just a thing to show you guys how to actually do these things, I'm not going to go and rebuild this, because we don't have time to do that. And we're just going to tack it on at the very end. So what that means we need to do is we need to mask out the areas that we're going to be applying here, and then just take those cut out areas, and we're just going to tack them on at the end of our normal chain, if you will, for lack of a better word. So here, this is the mask that I had made earlier that is, oh, actually I did it exactly backwards now that I think about it. This is the positive areas, because I left them white, of where I want my shiny bits. So in reality, what I'm going to need to do, I could go back into Photoshop and fix it, which would probably be the most efficient thing, because I wouldn't need to add an extra node, but I'm going to just invert this grayscale. Maybe is it in here? Oh yeah, okay, it's not a node, it's in here, it's in the library, sorry. So I'm going to invert my grayscale. And so this is actually, so I want this normal, whichever one we choose, to appear in the white areas here. So we need a blend mode, and this will be our mask, and this will be our texture. Now we're going to leave this cut out, so we're actually going to have to make this bigger. So we're going to ramp up the output size to 3. Now we can better see what's going on. And then we are just going to make another blend node here. We're going to add this on top, and because we do want to see all the other things underneath, we're also going to, instead of having this be copy, we're going to have this as an overlay blend. And that gives us a super duper chunky metal. This is way more, I mean, this is like insanely bumpy. But it's not bumpy where we've got our little bolts, and it's not bumpy where we have these little globe things. So why don't we just take care of this? Well, you know what, let's take a look and see where we want to set our brackets. So let's bring down this intensity now that we can see what it looks like. So that's, I mean, you really don't want more than, okay, so figure that 0.5, we're going to leave 0.5 as like the top, that's the roughest it's going to get. Okay, so it gives us an idea of how to bracket out our input parameters. So let's go in here and make them. We're going to need 2. One, we're going to need to switch from one material to the other. So we will call this metal type, or maybe metal bump type. I'm going to use that for metal. I just copied it. I'm not going to do a group for this one. I don't think we need a group. We can change our mind later. Okay, so what this needs to be, because we're going to be using it for this, where are we? Yeah, for this multi-switch. Multi-switch is going to want an integer. So we're going to give it an integer. Let's call this an integer. And we're going to make it a drop-down list, because this is going to, I mean, we could use a slider, but then we're limited to, you know, numbers. We're limited to integers. But what we would like is for people to actually know what it is they're switching out. So we can give them a drop-down list to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign each integer. This is not, this wants 1 and 2. This does not want 0. So we're going to change this to 1. And what do we have on the 1 here? We have the scratched metal. Okay, so let's go back here. And we're going to call this scratched. And then we can add another item. And this one is going to be number 2. And we'll call this pitted. Oh, and I think this becomes, the one that's checked here is the default. So we've set it so that the scratched is the default. And then the second one will be pitted. Okay, so we can assign this now to our multi-switch. And we want this on our input selection, because we're not telling it how many of these slots we need. We're telling it which one of those slots we want to pick. So we're going to go metal bump type. And notice, we had made a whole bunch of floats, etc., but it's not giving those to us as a selection here. It will only look at the available integers. So that's the one we want. And again, it's using this as the default, but if we want to switch it now, we have to, I'm double clicking on this graph, we have to actually go to these guys. And here we can switch it from scratched to pitted and back to scratched again. And that same drop-down list is going to appear in Unity for us as well. Okay, so we're going to have to make one more parameter for the intensity of this mask. So again, I'm double clicking on the graph. I'm going to make a new input parameter. And we'll call this, you know what, yeah, let's make a group here. We'll call the group metal bump, and then we can have the type of metal, and then we can have metal bump intensity. I can't talk and type at the same time. So we're going to call this intensity, and then we'll call this metal bump. Okay, now here we know that 1 is way too big, so we decided we kind of liked 0.2. So I'm going to make 0.2 the default. My minimum is 0. My maximum, I don't want it to be as high as 1 because that's just insanely ugly, and we're going to set that the maximum parameter is going to be 5. Now, how I'm going to do this is by clamping it. Right now, it's not clamped down, so actually I want this just a little bit above 1 because that's where the, see, if I had left this as false and I left the maximum at 0.5, that by default, because it was going from 0 to 0.5, that by default would have kind of clamped it at the upper end. The clamp, you really use it when you're bracketing it from both ends. So I don't want there to be no bump at all. So I'm going to just set it as let's set it as 0.02. Just so we have now 0.02. And then I'm going to clamp it. So I'll do true as the clamp. It's not going to let anybody bring this down to 0 again. So you've limited your slider here between 0.02 and 0.5. And this, the step here is the increments in which people are going to be moving that slider. So generally I leave it at 0.01. It gives you a nice smooth slide. But you could actually set this to be single digits also. It really depends on what you want. But this is a way to control how people are actually using those sliders when they're using it in Unity. Okay, so I think we're done. Did we put it? No, we're not done. Yeah, we are. Okay, so let's publish this out and see what it's doing. And I believe that's it. It's going to look pretty ugly. Again, I should have integrated it better if I was really going to do this. And I would have also picked more better textures, but this is what I got. This is only an illustration of what can be done. Yeah, but I think it looks better with a bit of bump to it. I think it's probably a bit too much what it's got now, but I don't know. Let's take a look in Unity. So I'm going to go into my Explorer. I'm going to highlight my file name, and I'm going to publish it. Okay, so it's baked out. Let's take a look at what's going on in Unity. Man, this thing's ugly. That's okay. Yeah, so look, it's gotten kind of chunky here. We've got our little bump, but it's leaving our little bolts nice and smooth. And let's take a look at the substance itself. And where's our, yeah, so we got our scratched and we got our pitted. Oh, you know what we don't have because we forgot to connect it is our bump. I mean, our, yeah, the bump intensity. Let's go back here. And we should probably set that up for ourselves. So we are going to expose the intensity. We had it here as 0.36. So let's go ahead and just change that to 0.36 in here so it doesn't get all weird. 0.36. So that'll be what we have set up in here. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but okay. So that's our normal Sobel, and we're just going to expose the intensity, and we are going to assign it metal bump intensity. And then we get to republish it. So we're going to do that again. Okay, let's see if that worked any better. Let's wait for it to refresh. And here we go. So now, okay, so we can switch, that's the pitted metal, right? So we could switch the intensity. Yeah, because had I done this from the beginning, I would have integrated all of this so we could have had it so like if you have one here, you have the other here. I mean, you can get really cool and creative with the way that you sort of attach these things to each other, and you're using the masks, and you have a tremendous amount of flexibility. It usually works best if you kind of make a plan before you start, at least a sort of broad strokes plan. And it usually saves you some work, but that's kind of cool. And then you can change it. Scratched. I think I like the pitted one better. What's going on? I don't know what's going on with my computer. It's clearly trying to think about something. Okay. Yeah. I think we're done. At least we're done with this thing. I'm kind of sick of looking at it, and it's looking very pink. Okay. So until next time, it was a pleasure, and I hope to see you guys in my next class.